So, hi, Mr. Vitale. Hi, Pedro. Hi, everyone. This is a video podcast for Poste, the new journal promoted by Criminal Center for Research and Crime Prevention from Miguel Hernández University of Elche, Spain. Poste is a new journal for scientific dissemination about crime in society in the post-COVID era. And inside Poste, we have a section called Postinformation, devoted to current topics about social conflicts and new trends in criminology and related sciences that are discussed on social networks, but we believe need deeply analysis. With us is Pedro Campoy, who is directing this section and will explain us briefly its goal. Pedro?
Hi, Fernando. Hi, Mr. Vitale. Thank you for being with us. So here we go with the opening post for Postinformation. In Postinformation, we try to understand different points of view about current themes around the world, and we want to spread the word of academics and practitioners in our country, Spain, and also in Europe. We have dedicated this first issue Black Lives Matter movement, not only because its relevance and currency, but also because it's a transversal problem that even emerging at the USA affects to all countries and their policy and politics, you know. And so that's Postinformation information. And Fernando, let's begin. Let's start with the interview. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have the honor of having here Professor Alex Vitale. Mr. Vitale is Professor of Sociology and Coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College and a visiting Professor at London Southbank University, if I'm not mistaken. He has spent the last 25-30 years writing about very different topics, but especially policing, and consults also both police departments and human rights organizations internationally. Professor Vitale is the author of different papers and books, especially City of Disorder, How the Quality of Life Campaign Transformed New York Politics, and the book that is more related with what we are going to talk today, The End of Policy. So, thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros, Alex. Thank you for your attendance, Professor Vitale. And let's start with some questions. For beginning, could you please, Alex, make us a brief summary of the Black Lives Matter movement blast in latest time, in your opinion? Because some people here in Europe could think that this is a new phenomenon, a new movement, but you've pointed out in social networks, in different places, that these problems have their roots in past problems. Ferguson maybe was a turning point or just a consequence. What could you tell us about that, Alex?
So the concept, the kind of hashtag Black Lives Matter, the formation of a kind of network of organizations actually begins with the killing of Trayvon Martin, which was before Ferguson. This was a young black man who had gone to the store to get some snack food and was killed by a vigilante who saw a black person in an otherwise non-black neighborhood, confronted him, a fight ensued, and initially there were no charges brought against the attacker for killing Trayvon. And that began to create a network of kind of young new civil rights activists. And when Mike Brown was killed by police in Ferguson, Missouri, that network helped to feed the protests and coordinate activities that occurred not just with the death of Mike Brown, but also the police killing of Eric Garner and Tamir Rice and the death of Sandra Bland and many others. And actual organizations have formed in cities, but there are many other formations that are not specifically Black Lives Matter that have formed to question police spending, the over-reliance on mass incarceration, and also to begin to develop a broader agenda about racial justice. to deal with things like unequal spending on schools, unequal access to health care, discrimination in housing and job markets. And so all of this has kind of burst onto the headlines in recent months because I think there's such a deep frustration about both the continuing killing of Black people by police and the continued almost second-class status of African Americans in American society. And all of this, I think, was also compounded by the COVID crisis, which was producing much higher mortality rates among Blacks. The economic impact of the shutdown and the loss of jobs was felt much more profoundly by Blacks. And also, I think there's a strong sense in which the leadership of both our political parties is more or less completely non-responsive to these issues. And when the normal channels of political participation feel closed, then you see street protest emerge.
And a structuralism, but at the root, do you still think that the problem is on the policing design with all its seats, or maybe a pure structural problem of the police, and also more focused? Maybe is the police itself the cause of the Black Lives Matter demonstration, or maybe the individual police officers' behavior and learning, the cause of the problem, or maybe both? Where do you focus the roots?
So let's talk about a couple things here. One is that it's important that we not understand this current movement as being just about policing. So when we look back, for instance, to the civil unrest, the protests, the riots, the uprisings of the 1960s in the United States, most of those were triggered by police activity, but no one today thinks of that as just a movement against bad policing. That was a movement, it was a broader agenda for Black civil rights and racial justice. And I think that's how we have to understand this moment as well. Policing is a kind of trigger, and over-criminalization is a key demand or criticism of this movement, but this is also a movement for jobs, better health care, better quality education. And the misconduct and abusiveness in American policing can also not be understood as just the behavior of individual officers that can be corrected through either accountability mechanisms like firing officers or prosecuting officers, or retraining officers or hiring better officers. This movement understands that the problems of policing in the United States are structural, that they are tied to the expanded mission of policing and the way in which policing has always historically served to facilitate profound inequalities of race and class. And so the defund the police movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, is much less interested in reforms to policing that will make police more professional, transparent, legitimate. They're much more interested in exploring the ways in which our reliance on policing is actually part of the systematic defunding and oppression of Black communities, and that we can't achieve real progress on racial justice as long as we continue to frame the problems of Black America as ones of crime to be solved by police.
Perfectly explained, Alex. It's true that we are very interested in this interview in that part of what will mean for policing and what it will mean in the debate about policing, because we are very also in criminology influenced by all the debates in the States, even if the characteristics are very different, and maybe the social problems are different too. So we have to take care or not translate it as a clear meaning. But we here are listening about different terms. When Black Lives Matter movement arrived here, we are listening about defund the police, abolish the police. You wrote a book 3 years ago. I remember buying it 2 years ago, before all of this, The End of Policing, a very good name and very good title. For our listeners at Europe, what end of policing does it mean? Or what do you mean? And in short, the funding, abolish, dismantle police, this objective, and we can see in social networks how very different people use different verbs. I'm very interested in what do you mean with the end of policing? Mean the end of police? Mean that we have to substitute the police for another thing? And what is the difference with the different terms used by other people?
So for me, the title of the book has a kind of double meaning. So first, there's the sense of the end in what we call ends and means. So what is the actual functional purpose of policing? What is the end of policing? And the second meaning is to signal that the solution to these problems is not the reform and relegitimation of policing, it is the diminishment of policing. And so, is that the same as abolish the police? Well, I tried to write the book in a way that I felt would not in any significant way undercut or diminish the argument for abolishing the police, and instead to try to produce a kind of practical roadmap for how to begin that process. To look concretely at the specific things that police do, informed by 20 years of scholarship on policing, to show the harms that many of the things that police do produce, and to discuss what we could do instead. So so that is very much what the defund movement is about. But there is a kind of deeper abolish the police analysis that wants to really begin envisioning what a world with no police would look like and to think about how to achieve that. And I feel connected to that movement and am happy to be part of that envisioning. But that's not exactly what the book does. How applicable is this to Europe? Well, it's clear that in a place like Spain, many of the social problems that have been turned over to police in the United States are not turned over to the Spanish police. So we don't see Spanish police filling schools. We don't see extensive use of police to manage low-level drug problems. We don't see intensive policing of sex work activity in Spain the way we do in the United States. You don't have mass homelessness the way we do in the United States. You don't have mass untreated mental illness the way we do in the United States. So you have little bits of these problems. It's not that these problems don't exist in Spain, and it's not that police don't have any connection to them, but these problems make up a huge proportion of daily policing in the United States. And so many sections of the book may feel less relevant to a European audience, but I think there are still some core lessons here. Anytime we see a problem turned over to police to manage, we should be asking what political purpose is being served by that, whose interests are being advanced, and what kinds of alternatives could we be looking to instead. And I would say one example would be to look at how the policing of the Indignados movement was handled, right? This was a fundamentally a political movement demanding concrete political changes, and instead of the Spanish state actually entering into a political process with that movement, it used police to suppress that movement.
Yeah, it's interesting what you are saying, because in the COVID crisis that we have had, we still have, but we have had a big one in Spain and a very deep lockdown and with some problems. There are a big discussion about the role that the police has played in this moment, because there are some people that say, okay, this wasn't problem of security, that was a health problem, and we have tried to solve it as a security problem, and we have put a lot of fines and a lot of police interventions in the streets, and as a problem of security, and the police has a very big role in this crisis. And there are some people that is saying, and I think they are right, that maybe we have to think more this as a health problem than a security problem. But so I think you are right that at the end the reflection is the same. Also, you say that the role of policing has been expanding over the years. Maybe 9/11 was a point of no return. Also, we have now the technology. It seems that there are more social demand of more policing. Do you believe that there is any police function that still deserves some funding or refunding, and do you think that this is going to change in the future?
So we have a pretty significant police apparatus in place, certainly in the US, but also in Spain and in the rest of Europe. So I don't think we need to expand that capacity. What we need to do is we need to look concretely at the social problems that different local places face that have been turned over to the criminal justice system to manage. And we need to ask whether or not that is actually the best way to address those problems in terms of effectiveness and in terms of humanity, right? Because criminal justice interventions rely on violence, coercion, and dehumanization, ultimately. And so those tools should always be understood as the tools of last resort. If we've exhausted other possibilities, if we've experimented and we've attempted to provide other kinds of interventions and they haven't worked, and only a coercive, violence-backed solution works, well, my view is then that's what we continue to do while we try to figure out that problem, while we ask deeper questions about why that problem continues to exist in the way that it does. But if new resources are available, take the case of England, right, which has seen significant cuts to its policing budgets, to have progressives in the Labour Party say, well, we blame the Conservatives for cuts to the policing budget, we want to refund the police, to me seems fundamentally misguided. Because if new resources are available, they should be used to fund exactly these alternatives, which is more consistent with a kind of social democratic vision of building up communities, providing resources for people, reducing inequalities that are ultimately responsible for creating safe, healthy, and resilient communities.
But it seems that it's like you put like a dichotomy, a total dichotomy. It's like we can use the funding for this or for this. The thing is, maybe it's right that you have some fundings and you have to decide in what you are going to spend it. But it's not both necessary to fight against inequalities, for example, and all the needs, and also to change some ways that and some structures of police that maybe this will need money?
Well, it's possible that when we strip away, as I said before, a whole set of functions that I think policing is not well suited for, that maybe there's something left, that there needs to be some repository of coercive capacity for the state that must continue to be funded. But that is so dramatically smaller than what we have today, even in the European context, I believe, that our emphasis should be on producing these alternative interventions. What are we doing to more successfully integrate recent immigrant populations, for instance, into the mainstream economy? What are we doing to deal with the kind of hopelessness among so many young people who are unable to find pathways into the formal economy given the current economic situation, right? But let's focus on those problems with the resources that are available. And I'll just say one more thing. It's not just about a trade-off of money. It's also, there are ideological implications, right? When we say that a problem is appropriately to be dealt with through policing, what we're saying is that that is a problem that will only respond to coercive and violence-based interventions. And ultimately, that implies that they're rooted in a kind of moral insufficiency that, or even in some cases, we hear this discourse in the US that these are just evildoers. And when we go down that road, we're cutting off the possibility of an intervention that's based on the possibility of redemption, rehabilitation, advancement, or acknowledging that good people do bad things sometimes. And so when we invest money in policing, we're also reinforcing an ideology that undermines a more progressive, let's say, social democratic possibility.
So just one question about the implication of the disappear of the police in this scenario. You have told about the Indignados movement here in Spain, but we can we have seen the USA some movements that have an initiative for maintaining the public order in some cities, but not with the police within the citizenship. You know, as Detroit, we have some autoproclaimed laws of the war maintaining in the public order maintenance. You know, if we believe that this other model is possible without policing or without police, how can we control or manage these movements, these saviors?
So if I understand you correctly, I mean, we have two kinds of public order problems, if you will, that are related, right? We have the public order problem of mass homelessness and untreated mental health and substance abuse problems and participation in black markets because of lack of access to formal economic activity. So you have, you know, drug dealing and sex work and stolen property, right? So you have this kind of order problem. And then you have the order problem of organized and disorganized protest activity. Marches, rallies, occupations, looting, etc. So in the US, we've turned all of that over to police to manage. And the question is, are there reasonable alternatives to managing those disorder problems? And you know, it's important, right, that we understand that police are not primarily law enforcement officers, they're order maintenance officers, right? That much of what they do is not directly tied to legal questions or legal frameworks that loosely, you know, influence and affect what they do. So can we produce order in these alternative ways? Well, if we can house people and provide them with basic medical services so that they're not wandering the streets in a mental illness crisis, right? If we can involve people, young people, in pro-social activities, in formal involvement in the economy, right? Then we reduce that disorder. And at the same time, we reduce the likelihood of political disorder because we're actually addressing underlying problems. So all of this would reduce the need for both police to manage homeless folks and young people, and also the need for large militant riot squads, which have historically been repositories of some of the most right-wing and regressive political movements in European society, right? There's a big crisis in Germany right now about, right-wing proto-fascist movements within the German riot police squads.
And do you think that we can change the mind of the citizens who demand this public order maintenance by the police? Do you think it's possible to change the our mind to intervene in these problems? Is an operative question?
Well, I don't think we can convince everyone. I mean, I think what needs to happen, and I can only really speak directly to the European, to the American context, is, we have to create a new majoritarian politics, not just about policing, but around this larger kind of racial and economic justice agenda that Black Lives Matter, Democratic Socialists of America, Bernie Sanders, AOC, right? That is also about addressing profound problems in housing markets and labor markets and the delivery of education and healthcare services, et cetera. So we're seeing in the U.S. some significant electoral victories by politicians who are articulating this broader political sort of transformative agenda. But that's only going to continue to happen to the extent that there's grassroots organizing, convincing people in actual neighborhoods that there are better ways to solve their problems than to turn them over to the police.
Alex, you were saying that, and I think it's very interesting, your point. And I'm still thinking about that. It's true that I have read some things about that you have said before, but you have said that policing is not properly a law enforcement agency, that policing is not a matter of law enforcement it's more a matter of security. The thing is, I think I got your point, and I think I understand what you are saying, but it's true that policing is also law enforcement, because there is some people that believe that with some abolishing positions, maybe what we are going to do is precisely to do that you are saying, is that define police as something only of public order and security, but not a matter of law enforcement. But we still have the police function as a limited function, or supposed to be a limited function. It's like the state has to do something with security, but also with the rights of people. So if we abolish the police and we do some substitution of that functions, maybe the problem is that we are going to say to the people that, okay, we don't have nothing to do with your rights, and it's only going to be like a private question of, for example, of security. People are going to decide if they want to protect themselves, and it's not a problem of the state. If we believe in policing, is because we also believe that people need to be protected also in their rights. So maybe the state is not doing well their job, but maybe we don't have to say, okay, it's not a matter of us. I don't know if I explain myself well.
Well, I think I understand a little bit what you're saying, right? Which is that even if we have a criticism of the state that is rooted in an understanding that the states that we have now primarily serve to enable regimes of inequality.
And has to do.
We would like to also think of the state as a guarantor of some basic rights.
Yeah.
And that this can, for instance, protect people from certain kinds of exploitation and predation, either in the economic sphere, in terms of interpersonal violence, etc. So does the state still need to, even if we, let's say, significantly, dramatically reduce street crime and interpersonal violence, do we still need some state capacity to play a regulatory function in a whole variety of arenas? And it's quite possible that this is the case. But that doesn't rely on criminal law for the most part, and it doesn't involve sending people with guns for the most part. Right? So it's a way of maybe thinking about policing rather than the police. So if we think of just the police as those people with badges and guns, then maybe that we can dramatically reduce our reliance on them, and their functions primarily serve to reproduce race and class inequality. And we can look instead to the possibility of regulatory functions within a kind of rights framework. But this is all very complicated because I don't think that's fully possible in the current kind of economic and political system that we have, which always views rights as a secondary consideration or mobilizes them against our enemies, to say, well, we can't have that socialist state over there because they don't give the same kind of rights and freedoms that we have, like China or Cuba or something like that, so that it's weaponized against states.
Pedro, I think you wanted to say something.
Well, just for me, one question related to the structure of the criminal justice system and is linked with our system, also here in Spain or in USA. All the countries we have a linked system with the productive system. Within security is a part of the economic change by definition in this structure, and how we can change our system, legal system, or criminal law enforcement system without changing the rest of the social structure, and maybe more in deep. Why the hybrid systems? I'm thinking about jails or that are a mixture of private, public, microsystems inside. How we can change these message structures within a macrostructure as capitalist one?
I think there are real limits to our ability to enact those kinds of institutional changes without addressing these larger structural dynamics. I mean, yes, we have some evidence that if we do some intensive procedural, technocratic interventions, we can save a few lives, we can somewhat reduce a jail population, but we don't change the overall impact of that system. We don't address the kinds of the general overall scope of the situation. So yes, I think that part of what I've been arguing the last few years is that policing reform cannot be achieved independently of these larger structural problems, right? We can't fix the way police deal with homeless people unless we start dramatically reducing the number of homeless people. Because the pressures on local politicians to manage the consequences of mass homelessness are so great that they will inevitably turn to the police to break up encampments, harass people out of certain commercial zones, and to drive them into the criminal justice system. And you can't fix that with giving police sensitivity training about how to deal with homeless people, because the political pressures to drive them out of spaces, whether or not it's legal, will remain in place.
But that is kind of a perverse function, because I'm imagining the jails, this microsystem needs the bin full. I'm sorry because the analogy, but how do we can put or feed the system? Policing, and it's perverse.
Well, we do have perverse incentives in the U.S., private prisons and funding based on head counts of prisoners. And these are political problems that we need to address and that this movement is trying to address. So there's strong opposition to private prisons, and these movements are demanding reductions in spending on local jails and closing down existing jails. But that's only going to be possible in the long run if we address the underlying public order problems that are being addressed through jailing people. So we've got to address the untreated mental health problems, the homelessness problems, the youth unemployment problems, or the political pressure to turn that back over to the criminal justice system will just reemerge.
So, Alex, I think it has been a very interesting conversation. I want to ask you for finishing, if you are optimistic or pessimistic, not talking about more, not for a long term, but thinking in short term or medium term. Do you think that we are going to see changes in short, or do you believe that we need to do more and it's needed to do more? And do you believe that it really is going to change something that we are going to see in next years?
I can only speak about the American context. So first of all, people are winning stuff. I mean, the city of Austin, Texas just, cut like a quarter of the police budget to invest in new community-based anti-violence initiatives. Albuquerque, New Mexico cut its police budget to create new mental health crisis services. Minneapolis is doing something very transformative. So there's reason for optimism at the local level. I think the situation in Washington, D.C. is very bad and is not going to get much better, regardless of who wins in November. The leadership of both the main political parties does not understand the demands of the Black Lives Matter and defund the police movements, is largely opposed to them. And I don't expect that to change dramatically in the short run. It's going to require several more election cycles, putting new members of Congress in place, et cetera, before I think we make real progress in Washington.
Okay, Pedro, do you have another one to finish? It's okay?
For me, it's okay. Thank you very much, Alex, for being with us.
Sí, claro.
Muchas gracias, Alex. Ha sido un placer. Thank you for being with us in Postinformation. And okay, let's keep in touch, and let's hope you the best for your career and still being also with all the discussions in social networks. We will follow you.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Alex. Thank you.
Bye.